Well, welcome, my fellow busy buzzers, back to the Be in Eden radio show with Sedona Deb. We're being broadcast over the Storyteller's Campfire website. And today, the subject we're going to talk about is free-flowing prosperity. This is based on a blog I wrote earlier this year. But I want to open up by thinking about the phrase, the balance of nature. What is the balance of nature? We hear that phrase all the time. And we do sense that there is a harmony in our natural world. Certainly we see astonishing and uplifting examples of well-balanced design all around us. When good health and adequate resources are present, all living things go about their days successfully. An environment of peaceful equilibrium appears to be the state upon which nature thrives. However, in the world of bankers and bookkeepers, the word equilibrium, or balance, has taken on a bit of a twist. In their worldview, equilibrium has come to mean a state where two opposing forces zero themselves out at the bottom line of a ledger book. Unfortunately, we seem to be living in a world right now where a few hundred banksters are doing all the taking, while billions of other people are doing all of the giving. Sadly, in their formula, that situation actually defines a type of balance and proper order in the world. This is what today's show will talk about, a fact about nature that might change your perception of the phrase, the balance of nature. We're coming up to our first quick break, but please think about how you would answer this question. Does nature zero itself out at the end of the day? Do living things proceed along some kind of path of give and take, where the giving and the taking always come out even in the end? I propose to you that there is something about our natural world that actually teaches us that 1 + 1 might actually equal 3 or 4 or even some infinite number. Crazy, right? Well, we'll be right back and talk about it.
What started out as ordinary became a life of voyages and journeys throughout the world. Wilbur Vantyne was part of some of the most monumental historical moments in American history, along with his crew, sailing on ships, across oceans, working his way to shipmaster, and becoming Captain Wilbur H. Vantyne. The autobiographical book, Some Nautical Tales, is filled with hundreds of stories of true events and has you coming back for more as Captain Vantyne explains the way the world was then and how it has shaped our world today. Take a voyage with Captain Vantyne. You will see life and the world in a way you have never known before, and you will be amazed that one man lived it on the seas. Visit online at somenauticaltales.com.
And welcome back to the show. I should also mention that this radio show will be archived along with a companion page full of pictures and extra research links at my blog for the show, which is at the website sedonadeb.wordpress.com. Or if you just Google search the words Sedona Deb blog, it should pop up in your search results. And at this page for today's show, I will have a link to an article I had written earlier this year where I write articles for a financial news website called roguemoney.net. But I wrote this particular article, which is also entitled Free Flowing Prosperity, to expose the reasons why the bankster's concept of the balance of nature is out of harmony with our natural world. In fact, it is downright anti-human. Their concept of balance was the result of taking some perfectly valid natural mathematical principles and twisting them into a formula that might sound logical and look logical, but actually reflect a very false view of the way our natural world works. I'll use portions of that article as the basis of our conversation today. There is something about the history of modern accounting principles that eludes most bankers and bookkeepers today. That is, the very system we call double entry bookkeeping became standardized in Europe during the Renaissance. Now, don't worry if you're not a math wizard. In this show today, we won't go too far in expounding on principles of accounting. Otherwise, I'm sure most of the audience would just fall right asleep. Basically, when you balance your checkbook, you are participating in this scheme of zeroing out your checkbook. Your goal is to get the balance in your checkbook to be equal to the balance in your bank statement. Or to put it another way, if you subtract your bank balance from your checkbook balance and have it come out exactly to zero, then you have balanced the scales and then you can get on with the rest of your day. Well, the Italian bankers of the 16th century are the ones who came up with these principles as a result of the rediscovery of a body of ancient hidden wisdom known as the Hermetica. However, there were several schools of thought that were being considered in the mystery schools and centers of higher education at that time. You may have heard of other belief systems like the Kabbalah or Gnosticism. Elements of all these systems began influencing the men who held positions of power in Western society, the movers and shakers of their time. However, this discovery of ancient wisdom also revealed some uncomfortable facts. One is that scientific knowledge which goes uncontrolled can result in the destruction of one's natural world or even the destruction of mankind itself. These bookkeeping principles actually work to those banksters' benefit by aiding them in setting up a social system of debt and finance that would keep humanity somewhat contained in a type of safety net. Yes, they viewed this system of debt we live under as a way of keeping us from hurting ourselves. This is why researchers like Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, whom I quote often in my blogs, constantly mention this central idea. There is a deep connection between physics and finance, or in our discussion today, I would modify that to say between energy and money. To get straight to the point, I want to explain how in our natural world, living things literally plug themselves into unlimited sources of energy. When they do this, the unlimited energy results in unending abundance on the earth. Hence the title of this show, Free Flowing Prosperity. Some portions from my blog that demonstrate how this process happens in, of all places, a vineyard. Now, I'm going to switch over in my web browser to go pick up on part of this. All right. I'm going to talk about a process in the vineyard that is used to propagate grapevines. And I have a picture of this, but basically this is called layering a grapevine. And what happens to make this, how you make this happen is you let one of the shoots of the grapevine grow extremely long. It's almost like you let it become its own electrical cord, extending way out on the trellis. And what you do is you bend that grape shoot down to the earth. And you don't plug the actual tip of the vine, but you sort of bend it a little bit so there's a kind of a U shape in the grapevine. And all along the shoots of a grapevine are little nodes that can sprout or produce a bud if given the opportunity. So you bend this little grapevine down while it's still connected to the mother grapevine. You bend the grape shoot down into the shape of a U, and at the elbow of that U, you tack it into the ground and let the node along that grape shoot sprout roots directly into the earth. And you're doing this while this new child grapevine is still connected to the mother vine. Now, like I said, the remaining tip of that long shoot is then trained upwards to become the trunk of the new replicated grapevine. So you have the mother grapevine is providing the shoot tip that becomes the next grapevine next to her, or what I call my article, the child grapevine. The reason I am using this illustration from our natural world is to demonstrate that what happens next between these two grapevines would make our zero-loving, debt-worshipping banksters' heads explode. Now, a banker who rules the world by his fabricated formula of closed, oppressive systems of debt and interest would look at this grapevine scenario and assume that the mother vine is lending her resources to the child vine. Her valuable nutrients and the hard work of her leaves, photosynthesis, are being withdrawn and transferred to the child grapevine. Such a withdrawal should result in a negative account balance on the mother side and an equalizing positive addition on the child side. We might expect, therefore, that the mother vine would experience a loss of grape production on her end due to the loss of her resources. And indeed, as seen in this quotation I'll mention from the textbook in my viticulture or grapevine management class, the author of my textbook also assumed that this would be the case, but that is not what he saw happen in his vineyard. He observed a different kind of balancing act. He did not see zero. Inexplicably, he observed that the free flow of resources between the two vines resulted in something like a botanical version of over-unity. In the world in energy, people use the word over-unity to refer to a system that is able to output more than it inputs. The two grapevines actually output more than they input. And this quote I'm going to mention is from the book, The Grape Grower, A Guide to Organic Viticulture, page 160, by Lon Rombau, who died recently, unfortunately. Here is this cultivator's observation, peculiarity of layering in this grapevine propagation method, is that our common sense suggests the layered vine would be a parasite, draining the older vine to which it is attached. Oddly, I've often seen the opposite in my vineyard. The layered vine actually feeds the older vine. Layered vines are often large enough the year after layering to have a crop about equal to that of an established solo vine. The parent vine, however, may have a crop that is larger than usual, but only on the side where the layered vine is attached. The other side should bear an average crop. Instead of draining the parent vine, layered vines actually boost them. After a few years, the two vines seem to balance out. Notice that word balance out, with both bearing good crops. This observation has obviously been made before, as one old English vineyard system advocated grafting the ends of shoots from adjoining vines together, making each row in the vineyard one big, long supervine. This seems reasonable, as connected vines should compensate each other for problems like variable soil, with vines in good soil sending energy to the ones in the poor soil. I have layered vines that are still connected to the parent vine after more than 5 years, and the connected plants have done better and produced more than neighboring single vines of the same variety. And that's where the quote from the book ends, and I returned in my blog to comment on that. Can you hear our Gnostic bankers' heads exploding yet? In this scenario in the vineyard, the mother vine did not experience any sacrifice. Therefore, no debt was created. And yet the child vine was observed to have fed the older vine. Both vines became more prosperous by virtue of their being connected to each other. The author of that book does not pursue the question of how did this happen, but perhaps we readers of this blog can theorize what happened. In fact, the author in that quote, he did hint at what was causing it. He mentioned that there was a transference of energy. And this led me to create this statement. When living organisms in a symbiotic system enjoy free-flowing access to the energy resources needed for sustaining life, all participants within that system enjoy increased prosperity. The natural world thus defies the very premise of our magic-practicing bankers who would have you remain subject to the false idea that balance means all positives go to them and all negatives go to you, unless zero is achieved. And I quote in my blog from another blogger who has a very interesting website that demonstrates that banksters can graft their magic spell all they want about everything being reduced to zero in the end. But the simplest living things in our beautiful earth expose that priesthood as false prophets. Human beings have been endowed with the gift of access to the free flow of resources from their earthly home, the same as every grapevine, every bug, every living thing. All that is needed to return us to that state is to remove the obstacle of this mysticism and to have us return to the principles mankind knew before these false religious systems of debt enslaved him. And that, my friends, is the whole reason why I adopted the words, the Bee in Eden radio show. Now, we'll take our second break here. While we're away, let that lesson from the vineyard sink in. What we're saying is that there is no such thing in nature as a loss that results from withdrawals of resources. When the child grapevine tapped into the resources of its mother grapevine, nobody experienced any loss. In fact, both grapevines became even more prosperous. In a very real sense, 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or even more than that. Okay, we'll take our quick break here, and then we'll come back and wrap this up.
Hey, all you kids out there, would you like to spend time with some books that takes you on adventures? Author Don Wynn has created a series of books where you can meet heroes in adventure with Twitch the squirrel and Higgledy-Piggledy the pigeon, a tortoise, Shelby the cat, the incredible Martin O'Shea, Chipper the clown, and Space Cop Zack Protector of the Galaxy, all part of the Cardboard Box Adventure books. This year, join us on international radio tours for previews of the books and register for a chance to win one of the exclusive puzzles from the series. Visit online at internationalradiotours.org.
And welcome back to our lesson from vineyard management and cultivation. to recap what we were just discovering on our previous segment, I'm saying that in our beautiful earthly inheritance, there are endless fields of free energy. When living things are allowed to plug themselves into those resources, those living things become more prosperous and do not suffer any sacrifice or debt or loss of assets to themselves. The vineyard thus defies the harmful logic of our Western banking system. You see, my friends, we have been taught to believe that if you take from one resources, you leave a hole in that resource, and you are now in debt to that hole, and you must refill it. So when bankers lend you money, or what they really lend you is just an ethereal idea called credit, they tell you that the natural order of your world demands that you balance those scales by paying them back. In fact, usually they ask you to overpay them by adding interest to that repayment. However, in our natural world, that is not how life works. There is no such thing as debt or withdrawals demanding repayment. Our modern system of banking and money lending is thus proven to be anti-natural and should be abolished. The very concept of debt does not even belong in our vocabulary because it does not belong in the vocabulary of any other living thing. In fact, some forward-thinking people are indeed pondering such ideas, and in my original article at roguemoney.net, I mentioned two ideas being proposed. One was from my friend Colin McKay, who has set out his ideas at a website whose address is delroar.org, and I'll spell it. It's a very easy website to type. It's D like David, EROR.org. He feels that every person should be allowed to create his own type of money. In effect, he's saying that every human being should become their own banker, just as our grapevines in the vineyard each produce grapes while yet being connected to each other. He has an interesting method where people will trade services with each other, and actually there is no long-term debt. In his system, there's sort of something like a debt jubilee every 7 days. Well, now let's think about why this show is called The Bee in Eden and how I named that for the idea of trying to think about how our human society was before there was any such thing as temples and religious ideas imposed as a slave system on us. Let's think about how the original families would have worked with each other way back before there was any such thing as letters of credit or borrowing or money lending. Colin McKay suggests that people bartered their time and skills with one another and simply kept track of doing favors with one another. You see, a society could come up with an exchange system like this where no long-lasting debt is incurred, or people just voluntarily actually help one another. In that system, everybody has equal access to Earth's energy, so there is no burden ever put on anybody. And in his system, as I mentioned, the debt or the obligations are reset weekly. It is an intriguing idea. In that article, I also refer to a video by another lady named Cindy K. Courier, who proposes something called the airship economy. And that word airship is not like Jefferson airship. It's the word HEIR, airship economy. And again, this is a natural monetary system that reflects the natural world of abundance that exists all around us. To summarize what this episode, Free-Flowing Prosperity of A Bee in Eden, wants you to take away is this. If people enjoyed unhindered access to systems of free energy, we would never suffer any scarcity. Human beings could go about their day with what they need to live, just as do all other living things on Earth. In fact, if we had access to whatever energy we needed, then there would be no need to have a debt-backed monetary system at all. There would be no need to have banks at all, or not in the sense we have them today. However, we would still be left with the somewhat valid fear that those students of the ancient mystery schools entertain, which is, can humans enjoy such unlimited access to endless energy without blowing themselves up? That is a question that cannot be ignored, and perhaps we will pursue that on a future show of A Bee in Eden. One thing for sure that we will discuss on a future show is exactly what false religious idea did those ancient mystery schools promote that got people convinced that they owed debts to those elite temple priesthoods in the first place. For now, the slant of the sunshine indicates that it's time for the bees to return to the hive. Take care, my fellow busy buzzers, and until next time we get to buzz along together, this is Sedona Deb signing off from the Bee in Eden.
Bryan Company would like to remind parents to teach their children safety rules to help keep the children in our community safe. Use the buddy system. Never walk alone. Don't go into a car or house without your parents' permission, and use a family kids code. Any adult without the kids code do not go with them. This important safety reminder is brought to you by Bryan Company, providing superior services in demolition and roll-off services in Tulare, Kings, and Fresno County since 1971. To learn more, visit online at bryancompany.net.